You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
7 out of 10 managers don't feel comfortable or don't feel like they have the right tools to discuss mental health in the workplace. So like 70% of people who are leading other people don't feel like they can actually talk about this type of stuff in the workplace. And if they don't talk about it, the people they're managing certainly aren't going to talk about it. When you're talking about burnout in the workplace, it starts with 1, having an awareness about it, and then 2, making an environment where it's safe to talk about. You can't address it until you have those 2 things.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
Julie, welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you could be here and that we could bring this conversation to our audience.
Yeah, Mike, I am really excited to have this conversation with you and share some wisdom with your audience. So let's get into it.
For context for the audience, Julie and I connected. I was on her podcast, which was excellent, a while back, maybe a year ago or so, something like that. And we kind of stayed in touch. And then all of a sudden, I've realized she has written a book. And having a book has been on my mind as like a project at some point in time. And so we've kind of reconnected over this and the process and everything. And I thought this whole topic of burnout would be awesome for our audience and kind of connecting, like, yes, entrepreneurs can get burned out, but obviously there's like a lot going on with burnout in Employeeville as well. Mm-hmm. And so I thought you'd be a great person to have on and talk about this entire subject. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and shed any light that I can on this topic. It's really important and impacting a lot of people these days. So
where I want to start is with a little bit of your journey. And maybe we can just start with what is your connection to, or I guess impetus for kind of studying this topic and wanting to help people who have experienced burnout?
Yeah, so it started with my own burnout, and I had a really epic emergency room style burnout in August of 2021. And I knew I was headed that way, and I knew what sent me into burnout, and I just couldn't seem to stop myself. So once I got recovered from that, it took me a couple of weeks to feel like I was steady again, quite frankly. I started looking for resources at the time, specifically for business owners. So I was Googling burned out business owners. What can business owners do who are burned out? And it was incredibly frustrating because there wasn't one resource, and most of the resources were kind of a throwaway blog post on a network that said things like take a break, do less, take a vacation, set better boundaries, which is all fantastic advice. But when you are in the midst of burnout and you're looking for a way to recover from it and a way to address it, it's not what anybody really wants to hear. And that just kind of set me on a path of studying it, talking to a lot of business owners about it, and realizing that I think it's probably one of the bigger threats to kind of our local communities and our local economies. And I'm just very passionate about helping business owners stay in business. And I think it's probably the second reason why business owners go out of business. And I just wanted to create a resource for people. And that's basically how I ended up writing the book and getting a book deal. And that's where we are today. And now I study it. I talk to a lot of people. I'm expanding to talk with leaders as well, and businesses, and even some corporations. It's a problem that's everywhere. And I'm concerned. I'm concerned for our population. And really, it's mostly the American culture that I'm working with, and the impact it's having around us. So that's where it all started and where I am today.
So you were a business owner at the time you experienced this burnout? Okay.
Yeah.
Because you previously had made a change, correct? You weren't you in the accounting world? Is that right?
So, yes, way back when. But I was actually when I experienced the burnout that I'm talking about, I was running a marketing agency. I had 6 employees, 7-figure business, 30-ish clients, managing through that. And that was part of the industry. It was part of what contributed to my burnout.
Right.
I focused in social media, there was a lot going on in 2020 and 2021 that was hard to manage in that role. So I actually exited that business last year, sold pieces and parts of it to get out because it took me a few years to do that, but I pretty quickly identified that was something that I had to do to protect myself, basically.
Okay. So you kind of mentioned that you intuitively knew you were headed down this sort of burnout path. Looking back, what were some of the red flags or the markers that were sort of classic signs that our audience could maybe, hopefully at some point see earlier to take some action?
Yeah. So I'll share what some of my classic signs were,
Sure.
and then also just one thing I would really like to share with your audience is that burnout shows up differently for everybody. So I'll share some things that I think are kind of unique to me as well. So some of the classic things, I wasn't sleeping. I mean, I was running on fumes, and no matter how tired I was, I couldn't sleep. And that had been going on for months. And I mean, I was even trying to take some medication to sleep and not sleeping. So it was pretty bad. So lack of sleep was a big one. And I was super irritable. My wife really caught the brunt of some of it. And I felt like there was just so much going on that I was managing, and I didn't feel like I had anybody to help me in that path. I also felt an incredible amount of guilt and failure. And I think that that's something that when people experience burnout, we don't want to admit that we burned out because of, we play these roles of successful business owner or, whatever it is. And I've learned the importance of having a place where you can put your titles and roles down and just be yourself and really talk to people about like what's going on. But at the time I didn't feel like I had that. And I had to be the successful business owner, and I was. I mean, that's the thing, is that I was a successful business owner, but I felt like burning out meant that I wasn't a successful business owner. So I didn't want to admit that I was headed down that path. So those are some common, I think, themes and signs that I see with my clients. 2 things that were really unique to me, and these have since become burnout red flags for me, is I was saying I just have to get through. There was a big event that was coming up for me, and I just kept saying I just have to get through this. I just have to get through this, and I'll be okay. But there was always something I just had to get through. So when I start saying that now, it's a red flag for me. And the other thing was I was actually canceling just regular doctor's appointments, like a physical or your yearly mammogram. Like I was rescheduling those dentist appointments, like the maintenance stuff, like the oil change for your car,
right?
But for your body, I was canceling those things and we're pushing them way off. And so those are 2 unique signs, I think, that I really pay attention to that now help me know if I'm headed towards burnout or not. So that's just some things that, that I noticed that came up.
There's a lot of places we could take this conversation. And I'm curious, like, I feel like maybe now is a good time to kind of understand your, I guess, definition of burnout. Like, how do we put guardrails around that topic? So maybe give me that. Yeah. And then I have a follow-up question.
So I have two definitions I use. Okay. One is you are dealing with an overwhelming amount of stress that you don't see an end in sight to. So you can't see the end of the tunnel. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. It's your day-to-day grind. And it's just pressing, crushing, like those are words that you typically use. that I hear when people are describing the stress that they have with burnout. So it's, again, just overwhelming stress where there's no end in sight to it, and you don't really have a way to deal with it. So that's one way. And then the other way that I talk about it is you're being depleted faster than you can replenish yourself. So eventually you're going to run out of whatever you're going to run out of your fuel or your gas or your juice, whatever you want to call it. But you can feel that you're just being depleted and you're not, replenishing your energy, your vitality. Those are two ways that I typically talk about it that really resonate with people.
Yeah, so that's great that there's two, because my follow-up question is really kind of like, I'm going to try to get at this.
Yeah.
Hopefully I say it correctly, but like, it feels to me like there is a link between burnout and dissatisfaction, but they're not the same. So like I deal with people who, are in the corporate world and are very dissatisfied with that path. They also may be experiencing burnout, which is leading to some of their dissatisfaction, but that's not necessarily the root. How do you see those things sort of interlinked? And is burnout just about like the volume of work and tasks being overwhelming, or is there another kind of source of that stress?
So I would say with dissatisfaction, I would consider that almost like a leading indicator that you're going to burn out or you're heading towards burnout. You might already be burned out. And I think for that one, it would depend on how long you'd been feeling that way. If you feel like you can make any changes, that's also probably for your audience. They may not feel like they can make changes that they need to make, which just kind of adds and adds and adds to it. So it's interesting with my audience. People who are burned out are not necessarily dissatisfied.
Right.
Sometimes burnout comes after we've achieved great success. Sometimes burnout comes after something great has happened. So it doesn't mean that, those things aren't necessarily equal. But I would say if you're dissatisfied, definitely that's something that would, put you in the risk column for burnout. In terms of the volume of work or the pace of work, I mean, there gets to a point where you just can't do any more work. And what I see more of is it's often the things at work. It's the having no hope of things changing, or the people that you're working with sometimes, if your bosses, if you're working in, corporate America, sometimes you're working for really bad leadership. It's almost like I think a toxic work environment is more of an indicator that there's risk of burnout than just the amount of work. Because at some point, and actually I think amount of work and pace of work is easier to address, because at some point you can't get it all done. You physically can't get it all done, and that starts showing up. And hopefully if you work in a decent workplace, you can have conversations with people before it gets to that point. Whereas if you work in a toxic environment, you're not going to feel like it's safe to say, okay, what would you like for me to deprioritize to prioritize this new thing you just put on my plate? You're not going to feel safe saying that at all if you work in a toxic environment. So I think that is more of the issue in a workplace setting than just the volume of work that you have to deal with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's why I love that you have you're kind of addressing it in two different ways, because the volume piece is, I agree with you. It's easier. I mean, something that I learned from a colleague when I was actually working a corporate job was like, she was brilliant. And she was like, I always try to run about 80%. Like I can't run 90%, 100%, because I'm going to essentially burn out. And that's really related to the volume and pace of work. I was like, oh man, that's like makes a ton of sense. Like, all right, like let's pace ourselves from that standpoint. So you can put in guardrails, and obviously like, you can take some concrete steps. The piece, the other stress piece, which is obviously linked to the dissatisfaction, that's sneaky, because there's so many other psychological factors involved. Like, okay, dissatisfaction. Well, you start thinking like in your example, well, I just have to get through X and then I will be okay. But that never, that never comes, as in your example. And so these things, like when we are not, so I believe that the root of the dissatisfaction is like, if you're not able to work and live as kind of like your more authentic self, and you are pretending or having any gap between who you really are and what in who you are at work. Like if there's kind of this split personality, that fissure just keeps getting wider and wider, and you don't notice it until something cracks. And I think that then kind of shows up as essentially what you're describing in burnout, with all of this stress, which toxic environment obviously can contribute, but it's not necessarily like the root cause.
And there's also I think in organizations you also have things like peer pressure. If you're a manager and somebody else is a manager and it seems like that other person is just getting so much more done than you, you're going to feel like, well, I shouldn't say anything because I need to keep pace with that person. When the reality is I would hope that you could say something to whoever your manager or superior is and say, I need, what are they doing? Can you give me some coaching here to help me? Or even go to that other person and say, what are you doing? How are you doing this? It really depends on the environment. I think that we live in a world where NAMI put out a study in May for Mental Health Awareness Month, and it was full of workplace mental health stats, right? The thing that stuck out, the one stat that stuck out the most to me was that 7 out of 10 managers don't feel comfortable or don't feel like they have the right tools to discuss mental health in the workplace. So like 70% of people who are leading other people don't feel like they can actually talk about this type of stuff in the workplace. And if they don't talk about it, the people they're managing certainly aren't going to talk about it. And so I think there's a whole conversation there. But it starts with, when you're talking about burnout in the workplace, it starts with, one, having an awareness about it, and then 2, making an environment where it's safe to talk about. Because you can't address it until you have those 2 things.
You're listening to the Break Podcast, powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
That's really interesting. And I had not thought about, that's amazing. And so I think there seems like there's like a really big opportunity there, because you see 2 things happening. One is, okay, we don't know how to talk about mental health in our company, so we're not going to talk about it. And on the other extreme, it's like the just acceptance of whatever issue you have as like, I need space for mental health day and this and that. And with psychology and all this stuff, like having the right toolkit to help somebody push through an issue that's maybe not big, right? Become resilient, or for the issues that are big and that do need the proper space and nurturing, right? Like being able to apply the right tools at the right time, because you sort of have like, oh, well, I just need a mental health day because I'm tired. Well, and I'm speaking from experience. What I'm saying is what I've felt before. We need both. Like, otherwise we're not building a kind of that resiliency in our labor force.
And that's, I do have a concern in the work that I do, where there's a lot of assessments, there's a lot of stuff out there about burnout and stress, but being very, very careful to delineate what is stress and what is burnout?
Right.
And both need to be addressed. But obviously, if you've got somebody who's burnt out, you've got to take care of them, pretty quickly, and then fix whatever burned them out. So hopefully it doesn't burn anybody else out in your workforce. And I think, you talked about resiliency, and I am a big believer in knowing where you are on those, for lack of a better word, spectrums.
Yeah.
Because if you're just naturally a higher in resilience, we kind of walk around thinking we're all really at the same level. But the reality is you are probably at a smaller percentage of people. And just having that self-awareness that's where the thought of, well, just suck it up. That's where that comes from,
Right.
is like really resilient people think everybody should be just that resilient,
Right.
or that they are. And the reality isn't that they're not. So I think having self-awareness of that, and then getting to know your people on certain like traits along those lines is really important, because then you can say, well, this person is going to be more likely to burn out if they're doing this or if they're doing that. Versus you can kind of come up with a more individualized plan in the workplace, with how to help yourself and your team address those challenges when you know that about yourself and you know that about them.
Yeah, like everything exists on like, I'm drawing a blank, but what's the game where you pull the ball out and it just, so a pendulum is what I'm
Okay.
thinking.
Yeah.
So everything
Yeah.
kind of works on a pendulum, right? Like tech, hustle culture, American spirit, ingenuity. It's all go, burnout, be resilient. And we're swinging to, okay, great. But, we've kind of swung the other way. It's like, all right, well, any little problem is a mental health problem. Like the answer is definitely somewhere in the middle. That's why I love what you said about kind of this continuum and having that empathy for where you are, but then also everybody else on your team, so you can handle them in another way, or in the better ways. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So how have your thoughts evolved on that? And are there any tools to help delineate like just normal sort of stress from burnout? Obviously you sort of elicited or alluded to a few of the kind of classic signs, but are there any tools or mechanisms that help us delineate that?
There's the gold standard is the Maslow burnout inventory.
Okay.
It's was developed by Christine Maslow I believe it was originally developed in the 70s, and it continues to be. She's like a founding person of studying workplace burnout. It's a very simple assessment, and it gives you a score basically that tells you like kind of where you are. That is really though the only objective research-backed study that we have, and it's literally a 10-question assessment. So that just tells you how far we need to evolve in this conversation. But that one, I like using that when people want that objective, like, am I or am I not? If signs and symptoms aren't enough, if you want to take a test, that's the one you take. And you can get it. You can Google it and get it for free or pay. I think there's a site that you can buy it off of. But the downside of that one is, and I think the downside of a lot of the assessments that are out there, don't really, they only look at workplace stuff. They don't factor in personal life. They don't factor in, caregiver stress or, personal health challenges. They don't really factor that in. It's always about workplace disengagement, workplace stress, all of that. So, but in terms of just objective based, that's the gold standard, that one assessment. I have a handful of questions that I ask people, but really some of the ways that it shows up for leaders are they become really indecisive. They're not taking action. And a lot of the times you'll start hearing them say, I don't care. I will hear a lot of the clients that I work with are business owners that have teams. And sometimes when they come to me, they're like, I don't even care. Like, I just don't, like, my team has all these questions about stuff and I just don't even care anymore. That's the disengagement part of it. So I've looked for ways to kind of get to those root signs of burnout, but ask questions that help people understand where they are in it. But yeah, there's not a lot. Just that one is really the scientific study that's out there, or the scientific objective assessment you can take. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, classic signs. We have an objective test. Okay. So what moves the needle on this problem? Like when you have a business owner that's dealing with burnout, what actually moves the needle and helps people get a handle on it?
It's shockingly taking action because one of the things I love about burnout is people think like just stop everything and that's going to fix it. It's not. So there's certain actions you got to take, and then making sure you have a support group, which is in the business owner world way different than a networking group. But the first two steps I always go through with my clients is, the first one is we have to learn how to say no to new opportunities. And that's a hard one for business owners. That's a hard one for people who like change and complexity. You tend to be visionaries because we tend to chase shiny objects a lot. But when you are burned out, the first thing you have to do is stop. You got to stop pouring fuel on the fire. So you got to learn how to say no to the new things that come across your plate. That's the first thing. And that presents in a lot of ways, but that's the first piece of advice. And then the next thing is I walk through what initiatives they have going on. So these are like bigger projects at work that aren't your typical, it's not like checking email. It's we're building a new website or we're launching a new product. So we look at the big initiatives, we kind of evaluate where we are in those initiatives, and then we identify which ones we can pause temporarily. So that it's really about taking very specific actions to prioritize what you are going to continue to do when you're burned out, and making sure that you don't put anything new on your plate during that time as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So really the exercise is in prioritization and focus versus mindless running around, your mind running around like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's entrepreneurship, when you're doing it, I think when you're doing it right, is you're walking by controlled fires every day. You just walk by those to work on the thing that actually matters. But when you're burned out, you get stuck at all those fires. You keep trying to put those fires out, and you just end up, doing 20 different things every day, but not really making any progress. That's something I see a lot too, is that, we focus on the easy stuff, the administrative stuff, and not the stuff that's going to really push the business forward when we're burned out. And that's a sign that I look for as well in business owners.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because I was just having a conversation today with my coaching group around frameworks for sort of allocating your time and like framing up the issues. And because the at the end of the day, like what our brains go when we are overwhelmed, our brains go to like creating the easiest, simplest habit, right? And so what ends up happening is our only filter to make decisions is whatever's right in front of us. Like overwhelm is a bunch of things coming at you. You're not able to, kind of narrow your focus and tune out the stuff that doesn't matter. So you see it all and it feels the same in terms of importance. But what's the thing right in front of me? Okay, try to put that out, try to put that in. And that's just like a whack-a-mole game that you can't win.
Yeah.
So you have to have some other way of putting priorities in place and stack ranking, what you need to do. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a ton of, I'm going to play around with this more because I do think a big challenge with people, like you can give them all the information you need, but like, what's your framework for making this decision? How would you figure this out? And how do you eliminate options and just focus on what you need to do. And so there, 80-20 rule, right? Like there's all sorts of things that you can think about, but it's really a process of getting your own brain to work the way you want it to and not focus on everything is the same.
Yeah. And when you're burned out, decision making about anything is such a heavy lift. So I think one thing that happens is, and I think this is what actually happened to me, is I knew I was burned out, but I couldn't figure out what in the world to do. So I just did. I mean, I was working a lot of hours and I wasn't getting anywhere, but I was doing the stuff that was easy for me to do, just to be able to say I was working. So that's one thing with burnout is I think it's decision making is just exhausting when you're in that about everything. Where do you want to get dinner tonight? I don't know. Like that's the kind of, when you're in burnout, even those decisions are impossible. They feel impossible.
There's a ton of parallels with like attention deficit disorder, like which I'm actually working, like I have issues with, and like very recently been diagnosed with this, and the way it's been described to me is very similar, where you have everything going on, so you don't know exactly what to focus on, and so you don't do anything, and everything just piles up, and then you end up getting in a state of like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm going to either do just the one thing in front of me that's easy, that doesn't take so much mental processing, or you start developing apathy, right? Like your example of, well, I don't care. So it's interesting, the parallels there that kind of come out, and it's basically our executive decision-making function just getting overridden by an onslaught of stuff that we're not able to filter and put in the right buckets of pay attention to or don't pay attention to.
And what I think is interesting, I know you work with a lot of individuals who are working in or working for, they have an employer, they're working in a job, and, kind of just coming back to that stat from NAMI, 7 out of the 10 people who are managing them don't have answers either, don't know how to help guide them, and I think that is, it's a systemic problem that we have here. And the causes of it, I could, rattle off a whole list, but I think underneath it all is just the pace of change and the intrusiveness of digital everything in our lives, and not being able to shut that off. That's something, and I don't have the answer for it. There's some obviously strategies and tactics you can use, but you have to be really good to hold yourself accountable to do things like stop doom scrolling when you're trying to go to sleep. It's really these mobile devices stuff is made. All of this is made to keep us constantly connected, and it's got its pros, but it's, one of the big cons I see is I think it's part of this huge problem of burnout that we have.
Yeah, because like that executive function overload that we were just talking about, I mean, it's like a vortex where you can't make bigger decisions. They start piling up. You get overwhelmed, you get frustrated. And so the easiest thing to do with your time is just be distracted. And your phone and your digital distraction, I mean, this thing that just, it's so easy to do that you actually feel like you're doing something, but it's just sucking more and more of your time and your energy and all of that kind of stuff. So it's such a vortex. And unfortunately, that thing is the easiest common denominator. So I know that doesn't solve the burnout issue, but it's sort of like a manifestation of it. So the people that you work with in their personal lives, health, fitness, stuff like that, what are they like? And are you doing anything to sort of try to raise the energy game with them? How How does that work, or is there an approach from that side of things?
What's interesting about the people that tend to come to me is they are usually doing one or two things to take care of themselves.
Okay.
Whether it's, running, meditating, some type of personal self-care activity that usually is enough. And what's interesting is when we start talking about that, it becomes clear that during the time of burnout, their normal habit isn't enough. And even if they usually maintain those habits, even when they come to me. I actually had a client a few months ago who she is a triathlete, and so she runs all the time. But when she was burning out, she was running more. Like, she was escaping into running. She injured herself, then she couldn't run. So that was a whole problem and separate problem. But it's very interesting because they usually are taking care of themselves. And trying to take care of themselves in some way. So from what I've observed and my own experience and in talking to close to 1,000 business owners at this point and high achievers, leaders, I've talked to other people who work for employers. There are 3 levels of burnout that I can see. The one that, unfortunately, physical burnout is kind of the last level. So the first level is attentional.
Okay.
That's where you get into the focus problems. You're not making decisions. You're having a hard time just like moving the needle on anything. So there's some signs there. The next one I get into is emotional. So it goes attentional, then it's emotional. And emotional is, this is where you just that's where you start hearing I don't care, or you're just angry or not, or numb. There's something going on emotionally with you that's different than the norm. And then finally, if we don't check it at those 2 points, then it gets into the physical burnout symptoms. And that's, unfortunately, I think most of us, when we burn out, we don't really start addressing it until we start feeling it. And so in my work, I try to catch it at attentional and emotional and turn it around before it gets us all the way down into physical burnout. Because physical burnout is where you start getting sick, going to the emergency room, like that type of stuff. And I think that just that awareness and knowing what burnout might look for you at those first 2 stages could help prevent a lot of the deeper burnout that I think most of us tend to think about when we think about burnout.
So how do you catch it in those earlier on? Obviously, being aware, right? Like,
yeah,
educating us on this stuff will certainly help. But sometimes, things get so overwhelming, we just can't even notice, what's going on with us.
The first piece of advice I often give people at this point is look back at times when you were like super stressed, or, you went through burnout. And try to remember what your signs were. I know it sounds, there's not a test for it. There's not, like, you can't go to the doctor and have them diagnose you with this. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to know what it looks like. One element is I usually recommend people understand how long it typically takes them to make a decision of a certain size in their business. So what does normal look like? What's your baseline? That's really the first step, is like, what does your baseline look like to, if you're a business owner, to decide to spend $5,000 on something. And then, if that's a week-long decision and it starts taking you a month to make decisions like that, that would be a sign of attentional burnout. So it's really understanding kind of what those things look like for you. And there's nothing that you just got to ask those questions. Like, are you dealing with inaction? Are you dealing with indecision? Are you dealing with indifference? Are you, able to effectively communicate with your team? That's another one where attentional burnout shows up, is that you don't have the attention to be able to communicate effectively and coherently with them. Those are some things that show up in that area. And it's harder to see that. And I don't have the test for it. I just know what some signs look like. For me, it's when my team is like, hey, did you make a decision about that? If my team has to ask me more than twice about something, like, what is going on? I mean, I'm busy, yeah, but that's a little red flag to me of, okay, let me see, where am I on the scale between baseline, my normal level, and my burnout level? They've asked me 3 times to answer a simple question that I usually answer the first time they ask. So that's a sign. The emotional stuff is, are you, really irritable? Are you numb? Are you not? Are you socially isolating? That's another one. Like, if you typically are extroverted and you're not going out with your friends or seeing your family, that's a sign of it too. So it's really, there are some pockets of, I would say, typical signs of it. And the most important thing is for you to know what your normal is. That's where it has to start.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
Baseline, just noticing what you're like. You can use journaling for this and just, think about day in the life, week in the life, month in the life. Just think through your decisions, how you make them, and compare that. Use that as your baseline and compare it to a time when you are burnt out or have been in the past. That makes a lot of sense. So what are the key factors, characteristics, activities, or things that people do that separate, someone who gets out of burnout gracefully or expediently, or however you want to say it, versus somebody who doesn't and continues to struggle? What are the separating factors, I guess?
I think the biggest separating factor is understanding that addressing the reasons for the burnout and personally recovering from it are 2 steps when they get out on the other side, or if they don't get out of it at all. So typically, let's say, one of the things that I see all the time is a key employee, key team member just suddenly resigns. Mm-hmm. And that causes a lot of upheaval for a business owner and any leader, really. That's going to cause a lot of stress and might cause burnout for them and their team. So what you got to do. Addressing the problem is there's a lot of things there, but you got to hire somebody to take on that work, most likely. But what a lot of people skip right over, they address it and then they think, okay, my burnout is over, my burnout is done, I'm good. They don't actually take the time to recover from whatever that burnout cost them physically. So they don't take the time to take a mental health day, or they don't take the time to reflect on what happened and how to make it better going forward. They just don't take that. They don't take that step of recovering from it. They address the problem and then they're just like on to the next thing. And I think that is, depending on what causes the burnout and how long it's had been building. I have talked to people who burned out so badly, they've taken 2 years off of work. Now, that is not what most people can do. But sometimes people get to the point where they burn out so badly that in order for them to actually recover from it, they do end up, leaving their jobs or closing their businesses. So I think that is the difference. Addressing it and recovering are 2 separate steps. And the people who really leverage burnout and come out on the other side as gracefully as possible, they take the time to personally recover and figure out a prevention plan going forward. Those are the things that they do.
So
dropped a ton of knowledge on us about burnout, and your book is obviously titled Burned. It's right behind you.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the impetus of this book. I guess from a standpoint of like, what are people going to get from this book?
Yeah.
Who business owners are gonna eat this up, but what are they gonna really get from reading this book?
It's a process for all parts of burnout that is not out there, and I think it's the book that can save your business if you're going through burnout, or if if you're getting up into burnout. So I believe that this book is I think it's gonna save some business owners from going out of business. And I think that it will also, it's very applicable to leadership as well. And I am very passionate about that, Mike, because, business owners we employ a lot of people in the country, 60 some million people, 10 times the top three kind of corporate employers you think about. So it's really, really important for us to take care of our business owners. And burnout I'm pretty sure it's the second reason why businesses don't make it. And I want to fix as much of that as possible. So they're going to get that, and they're going to just get some really impactful, very process based. It's a process book. It's not filled with stories of other business owners book. It's very detailed and very process based. Step-by-step guide to, it's the business owner's guide to burnout. That's basically what they're going to get.
So, what I'm thinking about, I guess my goal for this book, even though I have nothing to do with it, you wrote the whole thing, but with what you said before about how, 7 out of 10 managers don't really know how to talk about mental health, like this book out in the world and being in the hands of small business owners across the country who obviously employ a ton of people, like that's going to give them a language and a system and a process to talk about it then with future leaders and with people in their that come into their businesses. And I think that's amazing because it hasn't been there yet. And so that's what I hope for from you, is that you get hundreds and thousands of people saying, wow, I didn't have a way to talk about this, and now I do, and I can help people catch these signs earlier.
Yeah, and I want to rewrite the thought that burnout equals failure, because that's not even remotely true. I want to make it so that it's okay to talk about. I mean, and it's something that the stats are there. Most of us go through it at one point or another, and it's such an important conversation. In an age when we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about workplace well-being, we're talking about the Great Resignation and all of these things, we're not talking about this enough. And I think part of the reason is people, are a little bit afraid to talk about it. And I hope that my book makes it so that there's less fear and less of that, and more of a understanding around what happens, why it happens, and how to get better, and how to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Curious, why did you ascribe failure to your episode of Burnout? Like, why was it failure in your mind?
Yeah. I think probably ego. Probably, when you're that saying of it's lonely at the top, it really can start to wear on a business owner, because you feel like there's nobody, you don't feel like there's a lot of people you can talk to about the stuff. And the people maybe you do feel like you can talk to maybe don't quite get it. Like your spouse, my wife loves me to death, but there are times she's like, babe, you got to talk to your coach or Trish or somebody else about this, because I don't know what to tell you. But you've got to be able to be vulnerable enough, which means you got to drop the ego to be able to do that. And for me, it was, I look at myself as a leader.
Right.
And at that time, I think there was that well, if I can't hold it together, I'm failing. Like if I can't hold it together for my people and my team and my, the board that I was a chairperson on a local board of directors for a volunteer organization. Like and my wife and all of this, like if I can't be the leader, people look to me to lead. And I felt like burning out meant that I was not fulfilling that role. And so I think it comes back to the roles that we play and understanding that sometimes you got to play a different role, or you got to put that role down. You got to be able to put all of those labels down to deal with the stuff.
That's interesting. The labels piece, like, yeah, I totally resonate with that. Not only as a business owner, but just like as a dad too. Like for me, it's burnout, mental health, whatever you want to call it. I mean, obviously those are all not the same thing, but if I admitted to myself that I needed something, like help, for instance, right? Then was I this leader? Was I this, and I think that's really interesting. That's I think what you were getting at. So yeah, dropping that label of I have to be this particular outward expression of me, because that's what a leader is or whatever. And I can't show vulnerability or that I need something. I have to be the one providing for everybody else. Dropping that's hard. It's a difficult thing, but that is where, I mean, I definitely like with communities like what you're creating and the coaching and stuff that I'm doing, like I get so much satisfaction out of holding that space for people who are at the top and are doing really well, but still have these issues, and they need a space to like be able to talk about it so we can work through it. And so from the other side, like it gives me so much satisfaction, but I had such a hard time with that, dropping that label and letting somebody in to help me. It's
really hard. And I think the other part of it that makes it really hard is that lonely at the top thing, because it's tough. Even if you are willing to drop that label, finding your support group to drop that label around is kind of the second piece of that's really hard to do, because I have been burned by sharing too much with other business owners and groups that I thought I could trust. And I think some of that, you learn those lessons. Those are hard lessons, but they scar you. They leave a mark. And so I had to figure out like who in my group could I really turn to and talk about this really hard stuff that I was dealing with, and not be judged, and not feel like they were going to say something at the next networking group, or, have their opinion of me change. So finding those two things, like dropping the label is one thing, but finding a place where you're around peers that you feel safe enough to do that around is a tough. It's a heavy lift. And that's one of the reasons I started coaching, because I know how much that is needed.
Yeah.
To be able to be around somebody who's not going to judge you, no matter what it is.
Yeah. Exactly the same feeling with me too. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about how we get our hands on this book.
Yeah. Well, go to Amazon, type in Burned Julie B, and it'll pop up and you buy it. It comes out, I don't know when this podcast will drop, but it's we are about a week and a half out from it being shipped to people. So awesome. June 18th is the date. June 18th, 2024 is the date that it is officially out into the world. So yeah, I mean, you get it anywhere you buy books, it's available. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, all of those places. So yeah, support a small business owner. And even if you don't think you need it, I'll tell you, a lot of the people who have read it already for early endorsements, some of their comments are like, even if you aren't burned out, it's a manual that you need to read. I've had people call it a life manual. So didn't anticipate that one, but there's something in it for everybody. I think anybody who's a business owner will get something out of it. And quite frankly, I think leaders can also read it and get quite a bit out of it. So.
Yeah. And I would also say to, my audience who is people thinking about and taking steps to become business owners, like this is a problem. It's not like you quit your job, create a business, and all of your problems go away. You sign up for different problems, right? And so getting your head wrapped around some of that journey and what's upcoming and how you can deal with it ahead of time, I think is definitely a valuable investment. So I think it makes a ton of sense for that cohort of people as well. I know I've got my signed copy coming to me very soon. And I think this episode will drop pretty coincidentally with that June 18th date. So that should be great.
Yeah.
Julie, got a couple rapid fire questions to ask you, and then we'll wrap this up. But I've learned a ton, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us. So here's our rapid fire questions. All right. Is there a recent author, thought leader, or influencer that you've come across that has really caught your attention and you think people need to know more about?
Chanel Basilio writes an amazing newsletter called Growth in Reverse that I just love.
Growth and Rivers or in?
Growth in Reverse.
Oh, reverse. Sorry. Got it.
Mm-hmm. And Growth in Reverse.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. What book are you reading right now or have read recently that has had a huge impact on you?
I am currently reading Mike Michalowicz's book, All In. It's about leadership as a business owner, and it's probably one of the best books I've read. It gives you very process-based information about how to be a leader in a small business.
Okay. Have not heard of either of those, so I'll be checking them out. Do you have one piece of advice, like your strongest piece of advice for someone who's just starting out in the world? They're just maybe getting out of college, just starting their first job, getting their feet wet. Maybe that's the 20-year-old version of Julie B. One piece of advice.
Invest in tools that help you get to know yourself really on a deep level. So whether that's books, assessments, whatever it is, invest in that.
Love that. I just had Ali Razakos, who I met on LinkedIn. She's a coach online. And she said in our interview, she said, my favorite subject to study is myself. And she means that from like a psychological standpoint. And it was, I thought that was so good because when you know yourself, you learn a lot about other people, but you mainly learn about yourself and how you can deal better in like any situation that comes to you. So I love that. All right. What is getting you excited about the next 12 months? So there's a lot of negativity in the world, a lot of crazy stuff happening, and I want you to send us out with some good stuff, good news, stuff that you're excited about.
I'm excited to see what the millennial generation is going to do as they become the leaders of the country. I'm really excited to see how my nieces and nephews are going to change things and what they're going to be able to do. So that fresh perspective, that new perspective in there, I'm excited to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I feel like that's a pendulum generation. And we were talking about the pendulum earlier. There's good stuff in there for sure that I love. And there's stuff I'm like, oh man, but that's not my job. Right. I think you're spot on. Like, all right, let's embrace this and let's see what's going to happen and see how they can take the country forward. Yeah. So that's a good one. I like it.
Every leader makes mistakes. It's what you do with them that matters, that counts. Yeah. So I think they're starting to get into places where they've had the opportunity to make some of those mistakes and have some of those failures and maybe learn some perspective. So that's kind of why I'm excited about, the next 5 years or so to see how that plays out.
Awesome. All right. We covered the book. We know where to get that. Tell our audience where they can learn more about you or reach out and get in touch with you if they need to. How do we do that?
Yeah. So go to my website. It's thejulieb.com, TheJuliebee.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. That's the social platform I'm the most active on. So yeah, you can find me there. It's same handle, Julie B. And reach out if you have any questions about anything. Happy to discuss burnout or leadership or anything along those lines with you.
Awesome, Julie. Thanks so much for being on the program here. And I'm looking forward in the next 12 months to just continuing to be in touch with you and support you through everything you're doing, because I love it. It's awesome.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's a great conversation today.
All right. Take care.